Hello, hello. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. We are 4 o'clock on the dot. Right now, we've got almost 30 people. That's awesome. Yeah, let's give a hand of a shout. Now, in person, we have 2 people, so definitely big shout out to our 2 physics students that have came in person to see some cool physics demos. So I am Don Balanzat with the Physics Instructional Resource Team, and our team wanted to put on a little end of the year demo show for you guys. And I see a mix of students, professors, admin from the department. Thank you all so much for coming. I think we've got a pretty good show for you today. Again, we are not a production crew, although we've tried our best to learn these skills over the past few months. As we all learn to adjust to the situation that we live in now. But yeah, like we're going to show you some very cool stuff today. Like I said, I'm Don Balanzat. This is Steve Renander, also part of the Physics Instructional Resource Team. This is Danielle, one of our student workers, a current sophomore in the physics department. And we are actually doing a remote show. So we've got Steve Shapiro in the other room. He's part of the Physics Instructional Resource Team as well, and he is joined in there by Chris, another one of our student workers, I believe also a sophomore. And so, yeah, there he is. We've got our awesome student workers, which is, it's not possible without them. So let's give it up for them. Yeah. So to start things off, I want to just talk about what physics is, right? It's this grand study of how matter operates within our universe. It's how it moves. It's how it takes energy from one form to another. And there's many different ways that we can explore this concept. And that's essentially what we're going to do throughout this show. We're going to start off with Steve Renander here. He's going to talk about some classical mechanics, which is the very first thing that we teach in the physics department or in general. And Steve, please take it away.
So I will start here. So it's an honor, and I get to present one of the classic physics demos, the Monkey Hunter. Now, the story behind the demo is part of the whole demonstration. And in fact, I've been told that the story is pushing 100 years old, and it varies from place to place. So my version might vary from other versions. But the Monkey Hunter is kind of an odd story. It's kind of weird. But the more you think about it, like physics, it makes a little more sense. And it's a way of tying together projectile motion and free fall. And the idea, or the basis of this story, is up in a tree, you have a monkey hanging there from a branch, high up in the tree, up in the canopy of the forest. And down on the ground, you have the hunter with the gun. And for some reason, he wants to bag himself or shoot a monkey. And he does. He spots the monkey way up in the tree, takes aim. Unfortunately, right when he's taking aim, the monkey, hanging on with one hand, starts waving at him. And it's like, uh-oh, something's up. And so the hunter realizes that as soon as he pulls that trigger, the monkey is going to let go. So here we get this classic problem, and we've given an ASU twist. So if we can see up top here, our monkey is actually Wilbur the Wildcat. And he's way up top there. And he is anchored by an electromagnet. And so the electromagnet is wired into our trigger. And here is our hunter. Now the hunter, in this case, is a little more advanced. Well, first off, it's air-powered, pneumatic. It shoots a dart. So we're gonna actually try to hit Wilbur with this here dart. And it's also laser sighted. Now, that's where the hunter came into problems with this initial situation. It's like, does he aim at the monkey? Does he aim below the monkey? Or does he aim above the monkey? So 3 basic choices there. And we're gonna see if we can kind of identify the best choice. So, well, basically, I'll give you a little clue. The time that it takes for this dart to be fired and hit the monkey over here is going to be the same as the time it takes for the monkey, or in this case, Wilbur, to drop. It's a good clue. The other one I have to say is gravity, the non-discriminate force of nature. Acts the same on pretty much everything here on Earth. We have the same acceleration. And so I'm going to choose to aim right at Wilbur. Put him in the hat. So I'll load this guy up. Now remember, this is a live demo. And so we'll get going here. And if we have a 3, 2, 1, fire. Oh,
All right.
good shooting there, Tex. So the classic monkey hunter, and yeah, aim right at the monkey.
Bullseye.
Now, my second demo, which I have to say, initially I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then I realized, oh, what did I sign up for? There's the wrecking ball. Now, there's a couple of things I wanted to point out here. Get a little bit off the floor, but you can see we have a nice little cinder block there. And if you remember, when things are moving, they have some kinetic energy. Now, we'll pull it back a little bit, and we'll give it some potential energy based on position. So potential becomes kinetic. Now let's see if we can smash this thing. A little bit of aiming here. Woo! So we do have a fair amount of energy. Now, here's the part that I usually have trouble with. My brain really understands physics, but my nose and my toes, they argue with my brain a little bit. So let's see if I can stay in place here. So all potential, and then remember, it's going to convert to kinetic, back to potential, and hopefully it'll all be potential up here.
Let's do that one more time, except we're going to get the close-up so that we can really see
Should have a head
how
count.
close that gets to your face. All right.
Started sweating there. Now, as far as moving from energy from one place to the other, we're going to focus on using the spring.
Okay,
And
so
I have a couple partners here. They're going to help me out with this.
okay, so let's take these cinder blocks out of the way. Yeah.
So waves tend to be a common energy mover. And to demonstrate some wave behavior, in physics class, we tend to use a long, skinny spring. Sorry about my mask here, doing a lot of talking. And this will require some experts, some people with rhythm. Now, one of the first things we're going to do with the spring is something very basic down here on the ground here. Hopefully everybody, we're just going to send a singular pulse. And so Don just sends a singular pulse on the wave. And you can see it's reflected, and it's reflected backwards. Now, that's one nice wave behavior, reflection. And then also the waves can interact. So let's just see some interference. And you can go, let's go constructive if you can
Okay,
go.
so both this way. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
And you notice it kind of passes through, but gets bigger in the middle. So let's do that one more time.
3, 2, 1.
All right. But really, when we have a spring like this, waves also like to resonate. And we know that we can have some really basic waveforms. And at the nodes, we usually have, at the ends, we usually have nodes, no movement taking place. And in the middle, in this case, we'll have at least one antinode. Now let's see if we can get an antinode or one singular wave.
Cool. And so we'll have Danielle be the fixed end, and I'll do be the driving frequency. So
here we get one singular pulse the fundamental frequency. N equals 1. And at the end, we should have each a node, and in the middle, an antinode. Now, Don has to kind of generate the wave there, so he doesn't get a good, but once we take it up to the next level here, and this is where harmonics come into play. Here we get a node in the middle. He's barely moving. Nodes at each end, and 2 antinodes. And his requires the second harmonic. Now let's see what you guys can do. Can you try 3? Oh, and you can see that once they get it kind of dialed in there, there's that resonant frequency, and the spring just is attracted to that frequency. It just really works well there. See if we got what they got in them. How about 4?
That's it.
Oh, there we go.
Right?
Oh,
Oh, we're back to, yeah, that's 4.
there we go.
There we go.
And you notice we have 4 antinodes. Oh, geez, oh, there they're starting to red. And we have a beautiful standing wave there too.
Do you think, can we go for 5? So I'll have Danielle try. Let's see. All right.
Oh, yes, she got it. Ah, these guys did a good
So
job.
I'll try for 5 as well here. So.
Oh, look at those standing waves there. And then the clear nodes between each one of the antinodes there.
Whew.
I
All
have to
right.
give these guys a hand. They did great.
Okay, so you can take that.
So now we're going to take this waveform, or Don's going to take this waveform idea a little bit farther.
So there's this idea of resonance that that you were talking about. It's this frequency that, and I don't like to personify science all the time, but it's something that an object has a tendency to vibrate at. It likes to vibrate at it. And so when we generated just the right frequencies with the spring, we got those nice standing waveforms, these resonant waveforms. And so this is actually a property of a lot of different kinds of materials and objects in the universe. And so one example could be, for example, this bowl right here. And I'm going to switch the camera, or I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. What I have here, it's called a Tibetan singing bowl. And Tibetan monks would use this to guide their meditations because it made a very nice sound. Perhaps you can hear the sound when I vibrated at just the right frequency. Is this coming through? Any indication from the chat? Yes, you can hear it. All right. And so this is the frequency, this is that waveform that will always be produced by this bowl. It's the frequency that it likes to resonate at. And so you might notice there's some action going on in the water here. And I actually can turn on this document camera so we can get a closer look at exactly what that looks like. So right here, all I'm doing is putting my hands in the water to get the right amount of friction to create the vibration that this bowl likes. And so I'm going to go again. And I'm barely putting any pressure on it because you really have to be fine-tuned about how you get that frequency. And you can see there's places where a lot of action is going on, and there's places where there's not so much, like on the legs here. And so you can kind of play around with this idea with a variety of different things in a variety of different ways. So I'm going to reset the camera here. And we will move on to one of my favorite demonstrations that I have the pleasure to work with called the Rubens tube. And so what this is, it's a way to visualize sound waves. And a sound wave is essentially that back and forth motion of something creating a pressure difference in the air, and that pressure difference propagates, and it can be picked up by our ears, or it can be transferred to other materials. In this case, we have a column of air inside here, inside this aluminum tube, and there's maybe 130 holes in this tube. And on one side, I have a speaker, which I've connected all sorts of nice musical goodies that we're going to analyze. And the speaker will drive the air back and forth inside this tube. And it will, much like when we had the spring go back and forth and sends that wave pulse down the spring, it'll send it down this tube, and it will reflect off this solid end. And at certain points, much like the spring, we should see resonant frequencies. And so the way to actually see this is that I've got some propane. And this propane will, let me turn it on here. It will send it into this tube and accordingly out of each of these tiny holes. Oh yeah, it smells like propane for sure. And so when I light this up, we've got all of these nice jets of propane fire. I'm going to lower it just a little bit. We want to be safe with fire. And so when I send these sound waves through the speaker, we will see the differences in pressure in the differences in the height of the flame. That kind of makes sense along with this conservation of energy principle and nodes and antinodes, right? And so what I'm going to do is adjust the frequency. I'm going to start low. And remember, when we had the lower frequency, we were providing less energy, and we had that large waveform. If you remember when we were using the spring, it was just going back and forth real slow. And as we added more and found more resonant frequencies, it was going faster. So I've got 139 hertz here. Let me make sure all my inputs are correct, doing our due diligence here. And so, oh. Okay, so we're at 239. Can we see that on the screen? Okay, nothing very pretty just yet, so I'm going to sweep up through the frequencies. Ah, this is a pretty good one. You see these places of high action, or right here, and low action right here, and it kind of goes back and forth exactly like the spring did. And maybe we need a little more propane here. Yeah. If you remember, as we increase the frequency, and I've got a frequency generator, the times per second that it's vibrating back and forth, I can actually find the bigger standing waves, the higher order standing waves. Let me find a good one. Oh, it's being finicky today. 1 second. It should be noted that a scientist doesn't always do it right on the first try. Just remember, we are all about failure and accepting it here. Here we go. This is good. So you can see as I've swept higher, this is now 6 times what it was before. You can see there's a lot more waves, or a lot more nodes and antinodes. Oh. And so these are standing waves, and this is a very simple thing. A lot of the sounds that we hear are not simple standing waves, though. So we can actually, for example, look at certain kinds of music. Something that tends to resonate, pun intended, with this very well is flute music. And it kind of makes sense because a flute is also just a column of air, much like this is a column of air. And so the waveforms that it will like to produce will probably work well with this. And we found, this is a piece called Shaman's Call, Carlos Nakai, his album Earth Spirit. It's a really nice pan flute piece, and I'm gonna make sure the connections are all good here. This is to 2, all right. I'm gonna play it. right. I always love watching that. And so the last thing I want to show, again, that was a really nice waveform. Because it is just a nice cylindrical pipe, we get this nice, really solid waveforms. But I'm going to do one last thing here. I'm going to speak into it. And you can see my voice visualized in the fire. And you can see that it's probably not that, I don't want to say it's not nice to hear. I don't want to be self-deprecating, but it will probably not have really nice sinusoidal waveforms like that. And so go here, turn this up. Maybe this will work. Hello? 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 This is mic 1. Mic check, mic check. Mic check, mic check. Hello? Oh no. We are indeed having technical difficulties, but they have been resolved. Look at that. We can now see my voice in the fire. And I think that's pretty cool. I think this is something that you can actually build at home. This is, again, this is just a column of aluminum with some holes popped into it, and you're feeding some propane into it. It's really nice. And I guess I can try and match a note here. Let's do this. I didn't plan on doing this, but we're all about experimentation here in the physics department. So I will turn on our nice frequency generator. And we had it somewhere around 600, right, where we had a good waveform. And, okay, let's try that, shall we? You saw that was a really nice waveform, right? Let's see what mine is. Da, right, that was the note. Da. All right, I don't think that's that bad, right? All right. And so this is just the basics of sound, something that we go over extensively in physics. But you know what else we go extensively into in physics is electricity and magnetism, because one of the great things in physics is the electromagnetic wave. But before you can understand that wave, much like these sound waves, you must understand the basics of electricity. So we're going to pass it over to our remote Steven Shapiro.
So can you go, before I start, can everyone hear me? Let's see in the chat. Chris, let me know. Can they hear me? Awesome. No, not yet? Okay, cool. So everyone can hear me. Perfect. So as I begin, Don has mentioned that there are other types of waves other than sound. There are electromagnetic waves. But before we can get into electromagnetic waves, we have to kind of break down what does that mean. Now, some of you guys who are Physics 1 students, you learned up to this point. You've learned sound, you've learned all this stuff, but you haven't actually gotten into electricity and magnetism. So I'm going to begin by talking about the branch of physics that we call electrostatics. You may have heard the term static electricity before. That's the study of slow or non-moving charges. Now, a way that we can mess around with static electricity, some of you guys may have done this at home, is you rub your feet on the floor and you go and touch something metal. Well, you get that little shock, or you go maybe touch your little brother or sister. Maybe you rub a balloon on your head and you stick it to a wall. That's all playing around with electrostatics, or again, slow or non-moving charges. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that water is actually conductive. Now, overall, it's neutral. Two hydrogens, one oxygen. And even though overall it has no net charge, because of the separation of hydrogen, which is slightly more positive, and oxygen, which is slightly more negative, we actually get what's called a dipole, or a little bit of separation of charge in the individual molecule. So what we can actually see is that I could take, this is just a PVC pipe and just a piece of fur, and I could charge it up by rubbing. Now, this is the same thing, just like rubbing a balloon on your head, or again, rubbing your feet on some carpet. And if we let water come out, I just have a funnel here with some green water coming through. Let's get that water moving. There we go. What we can actually see is that if we charge up a rod, we can actually mess around with the electrostatic properties of water. And you can actually cause it to bend. It's true water bending. Let's charge this up a little bit more and we can go the opposite way. What's happening here is that the charge separation of that water molecule, so we actually got it lifting a little bit out of the sink, the separation of charge in that water molecule is actually attracting the charge that I'm building up in the PVC pipe. Now you can do this with other types of materials, stuff like silk, stuff like vinyl, and you can actually sometimes see repulsion instead of attraction. So this is pretty cool. You know, water, you can actually do this stuff at home. Again, just any sort of a charged tube. You can even potentially do this with a balloon if you have a fine enough stream. And you can pull that charge to you. So this is something fun, and again, something you can do at home. Now I'm going to stop our water right here. We're going to switch our camera shot here to our little room shot. Switch it for me, Chris. Awesome. There it goes. I don't know why it kind of spins when it does that. Hopefully it didn't make any of you guys dizzy. Now what we have here is what's called a Van de Graaff generator. People often see these and they go, oh, it's a Tesla coil. Not quite the same thing. You see, what's going on in here is the exact same thing that happened when we charged up the rod. I used fur and I rubbed it on the PVC tube. Well, in this, we have this silk band on the inside. And inside of this big metal disc, or this big metal sphere, there are these little fingers. And as the silk moves past it, it builds up charge within this metal tube. Now, what happens when you rub a balloon on your head too much? Well, your hair stands up, right? The actual hair fibers begin to repel one another and stand up. Well, we can actually see this same effect using our Van de Graaff. So as we build up charge, watch what happens. Well, it becomes a party. You start seeing this pom-pom and all of the hair on it stands up. Well, what's going on here? You see, we're actually building up a whole bunch of like charge within this metal sphere. So let's just say a whole bunch of positive charges. Now, as they build up, well, like charges repel one another. So as we build up a bunch of positive charge in one hair, it's going to repel the hair below it. And the same would be if these were negative. A whole bunch of negative charge building up in one hair is going to repel the other negative charge. Now, these are going to keep repelling one another. And you'd actually notice if I turn this off, they stay up for a little. But what's going on right here? What's this thing doing? This thing is actually stealing some of the charge from it. Stay on the camera shot for a bit. This thing is actually stealing some of the charge. So these are all repelling until that charge needs to go somewhere. Well, where does that charge go? It ends up leaving as a shock. If I go and touch this, it grounded. What happened is all the charge that had built up here in the sphere now jumped to my arm. Now, if I take off the hair, we can do another experiment dealing with the same properties. All these are right here are some pie tins. Now, these are just like what you'd cook at home. Whoop, okay, one less. These are just like what you'd cook with at home. Now, if I place all of these on top of my Van de Graaff, I want you guys at home to think here. And I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think before I turn it on. I've asked this question several times before, done this experiment quite a bit. I get a whole bunch of different responses. Now, as I build up like charge in the sphere, some people think, okay, these are going to go levitate on top of one another. Some people think they're all just going to explode off. Well, what happens? Let's see. As we turn this on, it builds up charge, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Notice what happened. They didn't all explode off. They didn't levitate. They actually came off one at a time. What was going on here is that as we had all of these stacked pie tins, and as we built up charge in the outside of this Van de Graaff, well, they were all getting a whole bunch of like charge building up. And ultimately, there was so much like charge in the second or penultimate pie tin compared to the top pie tin that it was strong enough to actually lift it off, create a little bit of imbalance, and therefore it fell off. Once that happened, we built up charge in the next pie tin. Again, little bit of charge built up, and it came off. So on and so forth until all of our pie tins fell off. Now, the Van de Graaff isn't just used for basic electrostatic demos like this. You often see these, they're called little lightning machines. Why? Because buildup of charge is actually the exact same way that lightning works and that we see happen in clouds. As clouds move past one another on a stormy night or a stormy day, the molecules in them rub against one another and charge gets built up. Well, once enough charge builds up in a cloud, that charge ultimately has to go somewhere. And where is it going to go? Well, it's going to be attracted to the nearest ground it can find. Let's say it builds up a bunch of positive charge, it's going to jump to the ultimate negative it can find. Well, usually that is the floor. We call that the ground. So the charge jumps it all the way to the ground. Now this follows what's called Coulomb's law. You see, it needs more charge in order to go a further distance. It creates more force and less force when it's further away. So when the clouds are really high up in the sky, it takes a lot more charge buildup for that bolt of lightning to hit the ground. Now you've probably heard before, you don't want to be standing alone in an open field during a lightning storm. Well, why is that? That's because the charge is going to try to take the easiest route possible. It's going to try to go the smallest distance it can to get to the ground. Well, charge, just like us, is lazy. It doesn't want a long path. So if you're alone, even though you may only be 6 feet taller than the ground, it would rather go through you to get to the ground, as opposed to just striking the ground near you. Now, if there's something else conductive around it, well, that charge is going to want to go that way instead. Like if it'll rather go toward water, which would conduct it, or go toward easier objects. Now, humans are conductive just like the ground, just like water. So what we see is that if I, risking myself here for science, if I bring my arm close to this Van de Graaff, I'll get shocked a few times. Hopefully you guys can see them. I'll keep going. Notice how my arm is twitching here. Now, I've done this for a while. This isn't out of fear. This isn't out of anything, oh, I'm kind of afraid of it. Your nerves and your muscles in your body are electrical. So every time this bolt strikes my arm, hopefully you guys can see some of those. Let's try to move my arm maybe here. Every time this bolt strikes my arm, you see a twitch. What's going on here? It's doing the exact There we go. Can you guys hear me again? Yes, good? Okay, sorry about that. So what ends up happening with these Van de Graaffs, as I'm talking about lightning and getting shocked, these things build up a ridiculous amount of voltage. Anywhere from 200 to 500,000 volts gets built up in these things. Now, it's so much voltage that it actually can affect electrical systems in other rooms. In fact, when Chris switched from our camera shot to our room shot, the reason he did that is because the Van de Graaff actually would cause the camera to start flickering. Now, in our tests, we thought this might happen. What's happening is it's putting out so much voltage that it actually can disrupt the mic. So that's what happened there. Now, coming back to our Van de Graaff, the body is electrical. So every time that bolt shocked me, it was actually causing my muscles to flex involuntarily. I didn't really have much of a choice on that. But now that I'm done with our big lightning machine, I've gotten shocked quite enough, which is why my hair is kind of standing up like that pom-pom was. I'm going to use what's called the Funfly stick. It's just a small version of the Van de Graaff. Now, what this does is this builds up charge, and look at what happens at first. Thanks for panning over here. Look what happens at first. It attracts my metal object here, my little Mylar object. But as soon as I can get this little object to fly off, notice now it's repelling. It's almost like the magic wand here. Well, why? Because I built up a certain amount of charge in my Funfly stick, and I gave that same charge to the Mylar. It's cool. It causes repulsion. Now, as I've mentioned so far, this has all been dealing with electrostatics, or slower non-moving charges. However, in life, we often see charges move places. Charges go around. Well, just like me moving and walking this stick, here we go, charges like to travel. Here we go. Whoop, there we go. Ah, got stuck. Charges like to travel. And as they like to travel, moving charges create what's called a magnetic field. Now, some of you guys have probably seen magnets before. Those are what are called permanent magnets. permanent magnets have an internal separation of charge that causes that field. We often see these, we often see magnetic fields caused by current. Now, when we have magnets, what they do is they either attract or repel one another. But if you get super strong magnets, or you get magnets with a changing magnetic field, what they can produce is what's called eddy currents. In fact, these magnets, what we have here is called a radar magnet. It's a super strong magnet. It's actually so strong, it can induce into something non-magnetic, something like aluminum. This is an aluminum board right here. Well, when I swing it, watch what happens. Our little pendulum, well, it swings through. It's probably what you'd expect, right? Why is this so amazing? What's going on here? Well, what I want you to note, and you guys may not be able to see it from the close-up shot, or you may not be able to see it from the room shot, is that this piece of aluminum has a bunch of slits in it. Well,
to your right a little bit. Yeah, or it's
my right?
People can see it there.
There we go. Fix that.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of slits right here in this piece of aluminum. Well, when we create these eddy currents, falls under what are called Faraday's and Lenz's law, we need to have a repulsion. We need to have one magnet inducing magnetism or magnetic charge or a magnetic field in something non-magnetic. But because we have all these little slits, it won't actually induce a solid magnetic field. However, if we replace this blade right here with one that's solid all the way through, now you see we don't have the slits at the bottom. Well, now you'll see something very different is going to happen. And in fact, I trust physics, and I trust physics so much that I'm willing to put my coworker on the line for this. I'm willing to put Don on the line here. Now, as I mentioned, what we should see here is repulsion in this non-magnetic piece. See if we can see it. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Face up to there. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. I heard that. He was a little bit afraid, but physics still works.
One more.
Physics works. Notice it stops just before it hits his face. Well, what's going on here is, like I said, it is creating a magnetic field in this piece of aluminum in the opposite direction as the magnetic field of our permanent magnet. But notice, even as it swings, it doesn't completely stop. There's a little bit of extra swinging here. There's a little bit of movement still. Why? Well, that's because it doesn't induce a perfect magnetic field. There are always a little bit of losses. In fact, this is the basis behind how stuff like wireless phone charging works. It also induces a wireless magnetic field in the object around it. But it's not quite perfect because our materials aren't perfect. It's really hard to manufacture perfect materials. And what we have right now, with respect to ideally perfect magnets, they only work when they are super duper cold or when we really freeze them. And so Don's going to pick up here and talk about.
Start moving this out.
Don?
So
Here, I gotcha.
I'm going to take that eddy current pendulum out. Give it up for Stevie
Thank you.
Shapiro. And we're going to move on, like you said, to this thing, this fantastic, amazing, weird, confusing thing called superconductors. And let's see if we can get the camera over here. Switch the input to Blackmagic on Zoom. And so what I've got here is liquid nitrogen. Nitrogen in the liquid phase. And this stuff is really, really cold. It's somewhere around 73 Kelvin, which is very cold, very, very cold. I think it's negative 200 Celsius or so. Much colder than probably anything you or I will ever encounter after this. And so basically what this can do is super cool these little disks. And so can we see this here? And something really interesting happens when these things are supercooled. And so I'm going to place this on a very strong magnet, and you'll see it kind of floats in place. Can we zoom in on that anymore? Yeah. And I didn't leave it in there too long, so it's not particularly strong. But this is a way that we got some new people coming in person. All right. So basically what this does is it is letting the transfer of electrical energy through completely perfectly. And this is that same concept that Stephen was talking about, where that big slab that we were going through the magnet with was imperfect. And so it was still moving kind of. But this is in fact locked into place. And you can see it's not just like a north on north magnet, which is like repulsing. It is in fact locked there because I can turn this upside down and it will also stay in place. I can reorient the geometry and will stay in place. And that's because those eddy currents, at least this is the classical way of describing it, those eddy currents are perfectly, are perfect and they are not losing any energy. So I'm gonna do this one more time, right here. And so this has a lot of implications. I mean, this on its own, what I'm doing here right now is really cool, but kind of comes off as a parlor trick, right? But something interesting can be done when we mess around with the geometries of the magnets. And so now we've got these circular magnets. What do you think will happen if I put the superconductor on here? My two students in the room here, what do you think? Will it rotate? What do you think? Absolutely no idea. All right. Well, in science, we do our experiment, right? We approach one of the guesses. We call that a hypothesis, and we do the experiment, and we find out what actually happens. And so I'm going to bring this up to the circular magnet, and it is free indeed to rotate. Now I want you to think about this for a second. There's no other thing that humanity has come up with that can freely rotate in space like this. Usually there's some friction due to an axle, say in a wheel, or some energy loss to heat, right? Let's turn it around. So this is kind of a revolutionary thing. This only was discovered, at least this property was only discovered about 100 years ago, and we are still figuring out why exactly this works. But we know enough to at least try and scale it up. And so what I've got here to the right is essentially a much bigger version of that circular geometry. And so I want you to think about the future for a second and realize that we can now transport these things essentially frictionless. There is no friction except for the air resistance. Kind of seems like a dream material, right? But if you can tell, even from this short demo of this bigger one, it doesn't quite stay up. And you can see there's all this kind of fog, this steam coming off of it. And that's because it's actually solidifying the water and the air around it. And when it does that, it loses some heat, it loses some energy, or it gains some energy by interacting with the environment. And we need to keep it cold for this thing to stay in effect. And this is one of the limitations. This is one of the limitations of this miracle material. It's something that researchers like Chase in the audience here actively are looking for answers to. It's something that if you are a student, or maybe I'm even speaking to the professors in the chat here, maybe you could be the one to solve it, right? We're all in this pursuit of science and physics together. And so this is the superconductor. It's a pioneering problem, honestly. And I always love to show it because even the greatest minds in the world don't know how these work quite yet. So that is the superconductor. Thank you. And then before we do our last demo, which should be coming in, hopefully, maybe, yeah, cool. Before I do our last demo, I just wanted to thank everyone again, and I'm gonna put this back. Actually, you can do that there. I want to thank everyone again for attending. We had more than 40 participants. That is really awesome. I know things are crazy and it's hard to find time to do a lot of things that we used to be able to do. And I just really, really want to thank you for coming and thank you for your support. Now with this last demonstration here, this is a vat of vegetable oil. I'm not going to tell you why this is special just yet because I'm first going to tell you about these awesome things called lasers. And if we can hit the lights, I'm going to do it right here. You can see this is a green laser. You can see that on the camera. this is just a very straight line of light. We can do really cool things to light once we understand the properties of electricity and magnetism. An electromagnetic wave is just another way of talking about light. And so this is just a green beam that I'm sending out through space. And what I've got here, you can't see it because it's dark now, but it's this kind of loopy thing. Maybe I can show you like this just by flashing the laser over it. You can kind of loosely see that laser structure. Now, this is a special geometry of material and a type of material that where I can point the laser into one end, like this, and it is actually coming out in a completely different direction, but a lot of that light is coming through. And so this is something called fiber optics. We are basically bouncing the light inside of the geometry over and over and over until it gets to the end. And this is the basis for, like fiber optic internet. This is why we have such great internet in a lot of different places, because this signal can get through in a really interesting geometry. But really what I want to get at is that we can manipulate light in a lot of different ways once we understand those properties of electricity and magnetism. This is what comes after as a consequence. Yeah, let's zoom in on that. And so I'm putting it in this way. It's coming out 90 degrees with a very strong signal. So the last thing I want to talk about is just one of these ways that we can manipulate light. There's this idea that all materials have this property called an index of refraction. It's how light bends when it enters into a material. You might remember being at a restaurant and you're looking at your cup and you put your straw in the cup and the straw looks like it's bending, right? And that's because the light that you're seeing out of the water is coming to you through the air, and the light in the water is coming to you through the water and then the air. And this idea that light bends, changes the speed of light, is what we found as it goes through the material. It makes that illusion or that perception that things are not exactly what they seem. And so I've got this vat. So what does that have to do with this vat of vegetable oil? And so I'm gonna turn the lights on just a little more because it seems a little dark on camera. There we go. And so this is just a standard 600 milliliter Pyrex beaker. And I'm going to basically put this into this vat of oil. And I chose these two materials because the beaker is made of Pyrex, and the vegetable oil and the Pyrex material have the same index of refraction. And something really interesting happens when you have two things of the same index right next to each other. And namely, we'll see at first, and we can go a little down here. Right? You can see the air inside of the beaker, but when I insert it completely, it disappears. And so it's totally, completely still in there, but because of the index of refraction, we can't perceive the bending of light. And so you can probably only see the text there on the side of the beaker. And I'm going to take it right back out. There it is. And then right back in. And if I angle the text just right, you probably can't see it. And for those of you with a keen eye, you might have noticed that I had another beaker in here. Not just one, but two. And so this is a testament to the observation side of science. Don't always see what, seeing is not always believing, and we should do a lot more work than just looking at something once before you think you understand what it's all about. And so this was our last demonstration for today. And thank you again so much for coming. I can't wait to read the chat and see what you guys were talking about. Please, if you're a student, take care of yourself, study hard. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you're inspired to keep studying physics. If you're a professor, keep chugging on. There's lots of students that need your help. Thank you very much to all of our admin and business side of our operation here at the physics department. None of this is possible without you. And yeah, thank you so much. Any questions in the chat before we go? And I'll switch this back to the. Take care.
You're welcome.
We know so much more. I'm happy you know a lot more. 258-818. All right, everyone, take a bow. Let's do it. Sweet. You should do this every year. Is that Jane Jackson?
That's Jane Jackson.
Thanks, Jane. The recording will be available. Ulterior motive for this was to use this for the virtual open door that will be premiering on March 1st. So hopefully you can share this with more people as the weeks and months go by. Yeah, no questions. All right. All right, well, we're going to end it here. Thank you again. Take care, everyone, and happy holidays.